So a couple weeks ago, I wrapped up my third semester of college, which of course was my spring 2023 semester. This was pretty much the midpoint of my time in college, as my first semester was spring 2022 and my last semester will be spring 2024. Therefore, I am now officially over halfway done with college, which is really cool to think about. So for this story time, I thought why not go back and reflect on my halfway point. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 51 on June 9th, 2023. So, if you haven't seen Storytimes 46 or 47, you might be confused as to why I considered my third semester at college as my midpoint. Because normally students go to college for 4 years, not 2.5 years. Well, I'm not exactly a traditional student. I went to an early college for high school, where I got both my high school diploma and my associate's degree all at the same time. On top of that, I graduated a semester early, so when I was supposed to graduate in May of 2022, I actually graduated in December of 2021, allowing me to get a head start, so that's why I only have 5 semesters at college rather than 8. Anyways, where do I go to school? Well, I don't go anywhere too special. I just go to a local state college a little under an hour from where I live. It's not too far from home, but it's not too close, so it's definitely the perfect distance, even if I rarely went home throughout the semester. Now, what am I studying? Well, I'm pursuing a degree in accounting and a minor in economics. I would have double majored in accounting and economics, but the economics program requires too much courses and would therefore force me to stay an extra 2 semesters, so I'm just getting the minor in it. I also was double majoring in accounting and finance, but I dropped the finance major because not only would the future finance courses not work well with my schedule, but I would also come to dislike the first finance class I took. More on that later. But regarding my prospective career path, I'm looking at going into public accounting, or public auditing. So even after I graduate, I'll have to continue studying since I'll also have to get my CPA license and all that stuff. So those are the basics for those who might not have seen Storytime before. I definitely recommend watching Storytimes 46 and 47 first, since they go over my first and second semesters of college respectively. Anyways, before I get to this semester, I first want to go back to November of 2022. So I applied to be a tutor for Principles of Accounting 1, Accounting 2121, and Business Calculus, which is Math 1120. Basically, at my old job, which was my college's bookstore, I was not being given enough hours. Like, throughout October, I was only given like 3 hours a week, so I needed to go somewhere so I could get more hours. And after probably my best interview performance ever, I got the job and now I get to help students taking these courses. And the best part is that I'm now working far more hours tutoring than I got a 25% raise. So this job worked out super well. I'll discuss more about my job throughout the story time since it played a huge part of my semester, but I wanted to touch on this because this is when I got the job. However, this did mean that I needed to do some preparing beforehand, and by preparing, that means going back and practicing the material from accounting and calculus, as well as creating formula sheets for the courses. I did this over my Christmas break, and while it did piss off my parents because I wasn't spending time with them, it did allow me to review and feel more confident about myself and my new job. Speaking which, my parents were not that excited about me starting the new job. They loved my bookstore job because I was given a 35% discount on merchandise, which they bought quite a bit of this semester. So they bought fall 2022 semester, not this semester. I didn't buy any merchandise, so it didn't really bother me that I lost my discount, but they were quite upset about me leaving and even claimed that it was a poor decision to leave. But eventually, they would kind of realize that they were wrong after not only hearing about how much money I made this semester compared to last semester, but also how I managed to help mom with her graduate thesis at the end of the semester using my job, which I'll discuss when we get to April. I also want to quickly touch base on housing. So last semester, I won the jackpot with housing, as I managed to get a 2-bedroom suite to myself. This was extremely convenient, as I had my own bedroom, living room, and bathroom to myself. However, this semester, someone will occupy the other room, meaning I will get my own bedroom, but I'll still have to share a living room and bathroom with someone. Still better than my first semester when I shared a room with someone, so I can't complain all that much, but I'll talk more about him later. Anyways, let's get started with talking about this semester. So after a pretty busy Christmas break, it was time to go back to school. Now, technically, I didn't have to go home for Christmas, as I could have just stayed up at school. But since everything would be closed, I went home for Christmas. But I could move back in whenever I wanted to, which I did on Wednesday, January 4th. On January 5th and 6th, I do attend training for my new job, which I'll get to in a little bit. So going back to January 4th, how did moving in go? Well, it was pretty easy. Most students weren't moving in until the 6th, so I had a really easy time getting my stuff unloaded from my truck and in parking it. That was around maybe 11 o'clock that morning when this happened. However, once I got my stuff unloaded, I got a text from my roommate and learned that he was not going to be my roommate. Apparently, he found out one of his friends was staying in the same dorm hall, so he decided to room with him and switch places with the guy who was there beforehand, so I had a different roommate than who was assigned. This guy would go on to be pretty cool, although he was a little out there, which I'll touch on in a bit. Anyways, for the next few hours, I pretty much just chilled in my room, unpacked my stuff, blasted my favorite Disturbed album, and basically just got settled. Then at 5 o'clock, I got a knock on my door. I went to open it, and long and behold, it was a new roommate as well as the roommate I was originally assigned. We introduced ourselves, I helped them get their stuff, and yeah, it was cool. Afterwards, I got to talk to my new roommate and learn some stuff about him. He was similar to me in the sense that he was a weeb, as he had a huge anime collection. Also, he learned that he lived near Greensboro and that he was a Japanese major, so things were going pretty well. However, that's when I would come to find that, how do I put this without sounding rude? I guess different. And by different, I mean he had 3 boyfriends. Now, I'm not saying him being gay or bisexual or whatever he is weird. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay or loving who you want. But the weird part was 3. What the actual fuck? Apparently, he's what you call polyamorous, however you pronounce that, which is where you have multiple lovers at one time. You'll come to know that I'm pretty slow when it comes to like pop culture and all this sexuality stuff, so excuse me if I say anything like politically incorrect, but yeah, okay. I've never heard of someone being in a 4-way relationship and the partners all knowing it, but apparently that's a thing nowadays. Anyways, I would also go on to discover that he was quite the extrovert. He streamed on Twitch, I think like twice a day with his boyfriends for like hours at a time. And when he streamed, he got pretty rowdy, which, I'll be honest, I used to be pretty rowdy back when I used to stream, but as I've gotten more and more introverted over the years, I've kind of realized I don't have the social or mental capacity to stream, so that's why I don't stream anymore, except for Storytime. But, of course, when he got rowdy, that meant that I could hear him, as the walls weren't the thickest. Although the easy solution would have been to just tell him to cut down on the noise, I really didn't want to do that because I was just a little too scared to tell him to cut the noise. But how did I deal with the noise? Well, after about a month, I managed to learn his stream schedule. I knew what times he would stream each day, so one day while he was streaming, I decided to spend the time that he was streaming in by making noise by watching My Dress Up Darling, which was the anime I was watching at the time, and it worked perfectly. I then decided from now on, I would begin watching anime regularly, and I continue to do so even though I no longer live with him, so what was initially a bad thing turned out to be really good. Now if I needed schoolwork to do, I just plugged my AirPods in, and those worked perfectly too. And to make things even better, we sometimes watched anime together, even binging half of My Hero Academia Season 3 a few days before move-out day, which is probably my main highlight with him since we also saw the fight between All For One and All Might. More on that later. So, even though this guy was definitely a little crazy, he was still a cool dude and good roommate. Way better than my roommate my first semester, that's for sure. Anyways, let's move on to the next day, January 5th. So, I woke up that morning at 8 a.m., as I had my training from 9 all the way to 4. Yeah. Almost an entire work day, but I didn't really mind it all that much since I got paid for this training and I didn't have much else to do. But overall, the first day was really just to show up, learn, and do the activities plan. I don't really remember much from this session, but I do recall me and my table, all of whom were fellow business tutors, having to make a skit about a service the tutoring department provides. It was cringy, but it worked and we got the job done. You can kind of think of You could think of this training kind of similarly to how SOAR worked for my first semester of college, which once again, if you're lost with SOAR, I recommend watching Storytime 46. Moving on to the next day, we had the second day of training. This session was a little more memorable, as it only consisted of us new tutors. They also kind of randomly selected our seating, so now I was with some tutors who taught other things, so it was really interesting to kind of hear their intake on their fields and how they were kind of planning to go about their tutoring. And it actually worked really well. We all became pretty close during the first half of the training, so much so that during our 1-hour lunch break, we all went to Chick-fil-A together and had lunch. It was a really nice and fun lunch. It's quite rare for me to be in a group like this, since I usually spend most of my time by myself, but I still had quite a lot of fun and got to know my new coworkers a lot better. So yeah, that was training. The next day, January 7th, Mom and my sister came up to my school. I think Dad was in Mexico that weekend for a business trip, so that's why he didn't join us. But anyways, there was a home basketball game that day, so we went over and saw it. Mom got pretty invested into it. Meanwhile, I just sat there on my phone for the most of the time since I don't really care for sports, and then my sister did the same thing as me, even if she's more interested in sports than I am, but that was that. And then that brings us to Monday, January 9th, the first day of class for the spring 2023 semester. Just like in Storytimes 46 and 47, I'm going to mention each course in the order they met. So I'll first mention my courses that met on Mondays, and then I'll move on to the classes that met on Tuesdays. Anyways, the first course I want to talk about is Management Information Systems 3130, or Info 3130, which is, of course, Management Information Systems, or MIS as I will refer it to throughout this story time. This course met on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10:10 to 11, so while it started early, it wasn't terrible. Still a little early for me since I usually wake up pretty late, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Anyways, you can kind of think of this class like a computer science course for business majors, but instead of talking about coding and programming languages and all that other stuff you would see in a computer science class, ours is a little different. We talked more about databases, cybersecurity for businesses, and automating processes to achieve a better supply chain. It was a really interesting class. But even better than that, it was also a really easy class. Coming in, I didn't think it was going to be easy since it's practically a computer science course and I am god-awful with technology, but it was actually really easy. Exams were taken online outside of class, and they were also open book and open notes too, so that made the 3 tests really easy since I could use my notes in case I forgot something. My professor was also a really fun person too. She made the class really interesting and I ended up learning a lot from this course. So yeah, cool professor, interesting course, and probably the easiest course I've taken in college. These 3 all came together to make for an excellent class. However, on the first day of class, my professor did something that I honestly think was a little uncool. She went ahead and assigned us a group project. Yeah, on the first day of class, a group project. That's not very nice at all. However, our grade for this project was going to be extra credit, so I can't really complain. But anyways, I'll refer to this project as the Icebreaker, since that's what it was called. It involved us being split into groups, each with a diverse range of majors, who had to come together to solve a business problem of our choice. We were given a week to do it, and on Wednesday, January 18th, we presented our slides to the class. For my group, we worked with the Ticketmaster issue with the Taylor Swift tickets. A few months before this, I believe tickets to a Taylor Swift concert were going for like tens of thousands of dollars due to ticket scarcity, which to me is mind-blowing. Like, I wouldn't even spend over $100 to see Powerwolf, which is my favorite band, let alone my entire life savings to see Taylor Swift or whatever pop artists are there nowadays. But for my group, we came up with solutions to stop the overpricing of tickets. Our solution involved creating a software called One-Click to Tix that prevents bots from purchasing tickets and to make purchasing tickets a lot more convenient. Now, the point of this project was to allow us to meet different majors and come together to make a good project. Each of us would specialize in the field we were studying and add our specific contributions based on our major. So being an accountant and an economist, I was in charge of the accounting and finance portion of our project. We also had a business analyst who did all the analytical and statistical solutions, a marketing major who discussed how we were going to advertise our solution, a supply chain management major explained how we were going to sell the right amount of tickets, and a management major explaining how each employee would contribute to the project. So it was certainly really cool seeing a bunch of different business majors coming together to solve this issue. Now, how we set our presentation was that for each slide, we talked about our respective field. So in my case, I of course talked about accounting and finances. Mine wasn't really all that special, I just talked about why we will initially recognize our revenue as deferred revenue until the concert ends, which is when we can officially recognize our revenue, as well as providing internal reports after each show that brings in over $250 million in revenue, aka Taylor Swifter. It wasn't anything too special and didn't really bring much to the project, but it did the job and I alongside my team members got extra credit, so everyone's a winner. Alright, I think that's enough talk about MIS. Let's move on into my next class, being Finance 3120, which is Financial Management, or Finance as I'll refer to it as. We met Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 12:20 to 1:10, so I had a little bit of a break between it and MIS. Anyways, this course is basically an overview of corporate finance. Much of the course overlapped with Intermediate Accounting 1, a course I took last fall. Therefore, it was certainly a lot easier for me because I had already knew a lot of the material in the course, but instead of being centered around accounting, it was a course centered around finance. Now, do not mistake the two, as while they are very similar, accounting looks at the past and present while finance looks into the future. That's why accounting deals with financial statements and bookkeeping, while finance deals with investments and risk management, as they look at the future. Just want to state the difference since I know these two fields are mixed up a ton. Oh, and from a stereotypical perspective, finance majors are where you'll see your finance bros, frat boys, and other business major stereotypes, while us accounting majors more closely resemble STEM majors due to the difficulty of our coursework, which is why we're referred to as the STEM majors of business. Just wanted to make that clear. Do not associate me with finance major stereotypes just because I'm an accounting major, as I, alongside most other accounting majors, are nothing like stereotypical finance majors. Anyways, this course started off in quite possibly the most interesting way I think a course has ever started with. On the first day of class, everyone was there. We were all ready to learn and begin our first day of finance, but there was one person who was not there. That person was our professor, but it wasn't just that. We were not assigned a professor. When I registered for courses back in November, I selected the finance section with no assigned professor because all the professors available for the course had to rate my professor score of less than 2. So I figured that I should just test my luck, and here we are. We got no professor. Ultimately, one student took control, told us that he would talk to the department, and he invited us to sign up for a group me chat for the course. We thanked him, signed a sheet, and then we left. So yeah, that was a weird ass way to start the course. But thanks to the student, the department was able to take control of the situation and assign a PhD student to teach our course. So really, our first day of class was Wednesday, January 11th. I'll talk more about that professor and how we did things when we get to Wednesday. For now, I want to talk about my third and final class I had on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, being Operations 3100, which is Operations Management. This is a course introducing business majors to operations and supply chain management. Now, I already had some general knowledge of this course coming in, as my dad is a purchasing manager, and he actually graduated with a supply chain management degree from the same school I go to. So I already kind of knew the stuff about operations management via dad's job, and even got to kind of compare what I learned in this class to dad's job. Anyways, this course met on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 1:25 to 2:15 in the same room as my finance class, so I didn't have to move, although I did just to give myself a break in between classes. Anyways, my professor was pretty cool. He was laid back and was pretty sarcastic, so he was a good professor. After that, I was done for the day, so I went back to my room and stayed there for the rest of the day. By the way, this will be extremely uncommon throughout this semester, as I would end up working roughly 20 hours a week, although not nearly as much as the beginning of the semester. So now let's talk about the next day, being Tuesday, January 10th. So Tuesdays this semester were extremely rough, as my first class was from 8:30 to 9:45, so I had to get up at 7 o'clock in order to wake up and get ready for it. Anyways, this class was Accounting 3300 Professional Development for Accountants. This is a one-credit course that accounting majors take that basically goes over life as an accountant after college, both in public and industry. We also talked about professional development and the CPA exam requirements. Of course, this was my easiest class this semester since it was just one credit, so therefore, you would expect that I wouldn't have much to talk about this class this semester, but you'd actually be wrong, as there's quite a lot that happened in this course. However, I'm not going to bring up this course this much, as there's quite a bit of stuff that is rather personal since it relates to my future professional life that I don't really feel very comfortable sharing online, so I won't discuss this course very much throughout the story time. This course only met on Tuesdays, so I at least was able to sleep in on Thursdays. But after this class, I was given an almost 2-hour break, but break time would be over at 11:30, which is when I had my second class of the day, being Economics 3125, Managerial Economics. This class met Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11:30 to 12:45. You could think of this course like an in-depth math-based version of Principles of Microeconomics, but with added managerial applications. It was basically a pretty interesting course, as well as a great course to introduce me to upper-level economics. As for the professor, well, if you've seen Storytime 47, you'd recognize this professor, as he was also my professor for Principles of Microeconomics and Macroeconomics. He was a really good professor for those two classes, so it was really nice getting him for a third class. Anyways, after Managerial Economics, I had yet another long break until it was time for my last class of the day, being Accounting 3324, Intermediate Accounting 2. So, if you've seen Storytime 47, you probably recall me taking Intermediate Accounting 1. This is pretty much the same ordeal, just a continuation of that course. Same professor for this course too, and considering she was really good for Intermediate Accounting 1, that made this course much easier. Overall, this course was very similar to Intermediate Accounting 1, only a little easier, so there won't really be as much to talk about regarding this course. This class took place on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2:30 to 3:45, so it was my latest course of the semester. And yeah, that wraps up the introduction for each course. I took a total of 16 credit hours, the most I've ever taken in one semester and will take in a semester, since I intend to take 15 this fall and 12 next spring, but more on that later. So let's talk about the next day, which was very special because it was my first ever tutoring appointment. Now, due to policies regarding privacy protections for tutees, called the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, as well as to be respectful to my tutees as possible, I will not disclose the names or any information about my tutees other than what I helped them with in any particular moments, even those whom I became good friends with. Just wanted to make that clear for those wondering why I will be keeping them anonymous, as not only do I want to respect their privacy, but it's also my department's policy. Anyways, my first session went really well. Basically, this student really just wanted to set up recurring appointments with me for Math 1120. So we did that and met every Wednesday from 5:30 to 6:30. It also helped that he had the same professor that I did when I took this course last spring. See Storytime 46 regarding my experience with this course. So I could give him some tips regarding how to work with a professor and how we did things. And yeah, it was a successful first session. Now let's backtrack a little bit and talk about my first actual day of financial management. So our professor spent the first 5 minutes apologizing for what happened on Monday. Then he spent the next half of the class discussing the syllabus, class policies, and all that other stuff professors go over on the first day. Then he moved on to course material. So yeah, that was class. So that's all the introductions. Now, you'll come to find that I actually don't have much to talk about in regards to January 2023. There's quite a bit that happened this month, but much of it is very personal information that deals with my prospective professional life that I would prefer not to share online. However, I will mention that mentally, January was a really bad month for me, as I was also still dealing with rejection. So for those who haven't seen Storytime 47, which was about my second semester at college, aka fall 2022 semester, I asked out a really cute girl in my intermediate County 1 class, and she said yes. We had a fantastic date and even held hands at one point. However, she declined a second date on December 1st. There's a lot more to the story, but that's basically the gist. It's a really cute story that unfortunately didn't have a good ending. But anyways, being rejected by her took a huge toll on my mental health, as not only was I rejected by a girl that I thought liked me back, but also she was almost the perfect match for me. We were both accounting majors and economics minors, we both love video games, and we both aren't the most social people, and so much other stuff that made her the only girl I've ever really been able to relate to deeply. This would lead me to dealing with heartbreak as well as just nervousness around women entirely until April, as it would actually be in an anime episode that helped me over it. Originally, I was going to discuss this episode in depth, but I decided that this isn't really the place to do it. But if you want to see the episode that helped me, I'll link it in the description. It's ReZero Season 1 Episode 18, which is the episode where Rim confesses her love to Subaru and gets rejected. It's an amazing episode and is also my second favorite episode of my all-time favorite anime, behind episode 15. So I definitely recommend giving it, as well as ReZero as a whole, to watch, since the whole show is just a downright masterpiece. But anyways, I was still doing things that helped me with my health, with tutoring probably being the main one, as talking about accounting or calculus always helped me distract me from my personal issues. I would also attend a session at my college's Counseling and Psychological Service station, or CAPS as I'll refer to them. Honestly, they weren't the most effective. The session was really just them asking about my history with mental health issues, which did last a little while since I have a very long history with mental health issues, but overall, it wasn't that effective, so unfortunately, I couldn't really use this to my disposal. But I still had my job and my schoolwork to distract me, so that helped me out. Anyways, let's go back to being a little more cheerful and move on to February 2023. That is a sentence that I thought I would never thought I would say throughout my 2.5 years of doing Storytime, as February is usually the worst month of the year. February 2018 was one of the worst months ever, February 2022 was a super bad as well, and February 2021 was pretty bad too, despite 2021 being one of the best years of my life. February is my least favorite month because in the middle of it is Valentine's Day, which is my least favorite day of the year. However, this year, despite being super hostile towards love at the time, my Valentine's Day was my February in general was actually really good. Yeah, I had a really good month. Let's talk about it. To start, let's talk about my first exam for the semester, being my first exam for Intermediate Accounting 2. So just like everything else in this course, this exam worked very similarly to how Intermediate Accounting 1 worked in fall 2022 semester. So if you've seen Storytime 47, you could think of this class as a continuation of this course. Anyways, the first exam was on inventory. So for it, we talked about how companies record the cost of goods sold and ending inventory using LIFO, FIFO, and average cost in both periodic and perpetual methods. Now, the periodic method was bullshit easy, since I learned how to do it in principles and taught it to students who came to me for help in accounting. But in a perpetual system, things work differently since companies record items as they are sold, so it was weird working with it. But I got the hang of it, and also got the hang of the other topics such as market versus net present value, freight on board, and shipping point and destination, and other stuff. I ended up making a 93 on this exam, which I was very happy about. Now, the next day, February 10th, I had another exam, this time for operations management. Now, exams for this class were super weird because while these exams were open book and open note, our professor required lockdown browser, which didn't make much sense to me. Like, you might as well make the exams closed note and closed book if he is going to use lockdown browser. But I don't have much to say, so I just had to go with the flow. Anyways, this exam was on the basics of operations and supply chain management, so things like types of manufacturing plants, assembly lines, how goods and services are provided, that kind of stuff. It was surprisingly more complex than what you might expect, as proved by me making a 78 on this exam, which was a little bit below my expectations, but oh well, I'd at least be able to do better on my next few exams. Also, while I'm at it, I want to discuss what might be one of the silliest assignments I've ever had to do for a class. So there's a joke that business is a super easy field, with claims that our final exams are coloring books. Personally, I think the people who say these things should take an accounting or an economics class, as that would definitely change their mind. But here I can actually kind of see why they claim business majors have it easy. As for this assignment, we were required to come up with a reality TV show and explain how we were going to produce it. Not nearly as easy as coloring in between the lines, but still a very easy assignment. Well, for most people that is. For me, this was actually not that easy, as I do not watch reality TV, as I only watch anime. Like, if you tell me to name my 5 favorite characters, excluding anime characters, I wouldn't be able to name a single one. In fact, other than The Office, I couldn't even name a single reality TV show. Therefore, I had to do a little bit of research to determine what it is and how to make one and all that stuff. And if you were to ask for my top 5 favorite anime characters, yeah, I could easily name you them. That'd be Deku, Rim, Todoroki, Bakugo, Kakashi. But in the end, I did my research and got a gist of what reality TV is, and I was able to do the assignment. So, what was my TV show based on? Well, about a week prior, I had a student come in for accounting tutoring. Basically, due to some circumstances, she had fallen behind and had her first exam coming up and needed to get caught. So during our appointment, I called her up on everything. In just the hour we had together, I managed to help her with the basics of accounting, simple financial ratios, transactions, and the differences between the cash basis and accrual basis of accounting. By the time we were done with the session, she was confident and ready for her exam. And the best part was that she did super well in that exam too, so needless to say that this session was a really good one. However, that's not why I bring this up. I actually brought it up because at the end of our session, she said that that they should fire her professor and replace her with me. Hey, if they did that, I wouldn't complain at all, as I'd make far more money as a professor than as a tutor. But this comment has really stuck with me, and it even continues to sit with me to this day. Therefore, for my operations management assignment, I decided that I was going to take her words literally and write a reality TV show where I actually do become an accounting professor at only 19 years old, since this TV show would theoretically take place this fall. Basically, it details me being both a student and a professor who teaches 2 sections of Principles Accounting 1 and 1 section of Intermediate Accounting 1. Of course, being only 19 years old, I am younger than all of my students, even those in my Principles of Accounting classes since I'm a sophomore in that class. Although I am technically the same age as most people here, I'm still a little younger since my birthday is June 21st. Therefore, things are spiced up by my very introverted personality, as noted by having professors in the accounting department make fun of me in the show for being so reserved and quiet. Overall, I had a blast doing this assignment, as I got to be super creative and take inspiration from a comment made to me by a 2D. Now, you're probably thinking, what the fuck does creating a TV show have to do with operations and supply chain management? Well, surprisingly, there's actually a lot of correlation between the two, with the biggest one being setting up a step-by-step process. In addition to making a TV show, we also had to come up with steps that we would need to take in order to get an airing for people to watch. Supply chain management works the same way, as purchasers have to come up with strategies to get goods from a supplier to the consumer at the lowest cost possible. So although the two may seem unrelated, they do actually have a lot of correlation with one another, so an assignment like this was a good one to introduce us to multi-step processes. Anyways, let's move on and talk about my third exam of the semester. We're already talking about third semester, but let's talk about my third exam for the semester, which was for MIS. Now, these exams work very similar to how my operations management exams worked, where we took our exams online, outside of class, and they were open book, open note. only that we didn't have a lockdown browser, so we didn't have to go through that hassle of writing our notes by hand and all that. So these exams were easier than in operations, which also makes sense since this was a super easy class as well. Anyways, I would actually not do well on this exam as I had hoped, only making an 87 on it, but I couldn't really complain, as this was still overall a really good grade. Honestly, I don't really remember why I didn't do so well on it, as it's been a little while, but I do recall that I thought that I could do a little better on it. Now, also in MIS, we did our second of 3 group projects, or our first of 2 non-extra credit projects. For this assignment, we had to basically create a presentation explaining a solution to a problem. In the problem, a lumber company in upstate New York has to manually read tables and then call their suppliers every day to find the most recent prices. Very commonly, the supplier has to call back the lumber company later because they don't have the most recent prices, in turn making things very difficult for both the lumber company and the customers. So our job was to find ways, using what we had learned in MIS so far, to automate this process, make things easier for the lumber company, customers, and suppliers. Now, as mentioned, this was a group project. However, we were allowed to choose our groups, which is pretty interesting because normally in college group assignments, you are either tasked with doing it with either someone who sits next to you, or your professor randomly assigns you a group. So letting us choose our own partners was very interesting. But the only issue is that I had no friends in MIS, and although I could have reached out to someone I had worked on the icebreaker with, it seemed like they were all working together. But thankfully, there was someone sitting beside me who had nobody to work with. So I built up the courage to ask if he wanted to work with me, and he was down for it, and we did super well. Basically, I told him that I would be in charge of most things and all he needed to do was give me some ideas as well as look over the PowerPoint when I finished, which he was cool with. So he gave me some ideas. I put those ideas on the PowerPoint, he then looked over it, and then we were done. And the best part was that we both made 100 on this assignment. So this is a very easy group project since my partner just let me do all the work. Most people would hate this, but as someone who prefers to have complete control over his work and take responsibility for it, I really like when this happens. Unfortunately, the next group project we did, which would be in late March, would not nearly go as well as this one, but more on that later. Anyways, let's backtrack a little bit to Tuesday, February 14th, which of course is Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is usually the worst day of the year for me. As someone who's grown up being judged for not being in a relationship, I've always found this day painful because to see all these happy couples posting on Instagram, and it sometimes makes me feel as if they're rubbing it in my face and that I'm single. This got so bad in 2022 that I had to take off from social media for a whole month because I genuinely hated everyone who was in a relationship. Now, being February 2023, with me still trying to get over my rejection from a couple months back, you might have expected me to have my worst Valentine's Day ever, but surprisingly, I had a really good one. Sure, it wasn't as good as it used to be back in elementary school where I'd get buried with candy, but it was still a good Valentine's Day. Way better than 2022 by far. Part of the reason might have to do with me taking a break from social media that week. I basically disabled both of my Instagram accounts that Sunday and took off until Saturday, which boosted my mood quite a bit. While I do enjoy using Instagram, as I really love the memes and the anime girls, it was still nice to have some time off, as it made me feel more relaxed and I didn't have to see any couples on my feed. Now, to make things even better, I had my first exam for managerial economics on Valentine's Day as well, so therefore, I had something to distract me from what was going on that day. So let's talk about it, as it kind of surprised me a bit. Of course, as mentioned, I had this professor for both principles of microeconomics and macroeconomics. In these classes, our exams were on Connect, which was the website we used to do our assignments and access our textbook from. However, managerial economics worked differently, as we used a different service for our textbook and in the chapter questions, but we used Canvas, which is the school-wide site for our courses, to access our written homework assignments and take the exams. Now, the exam was split into 2 parts. The first part, worth 33% of our exam, consisted of 10 multiple choice questions, the majority of which were conceptual. Interestingly, they were usually the hardest questions for me, since I'm a lot better at math and application-based problems than I am at conceptual and reasoning-based problems. But lucky for me, the next 10 questions, which were worth 67% of the exam, were written response questions. Basically, our professor handed each of us a sheet with boxes for these 10 problems. We were required to show our work for these problems, so we did our work in the boxes and then typed our answers onto Canvas. Seems rudimentary enough, but the difficulty comes with working space, as the lecture hall wasn't nearly the best place for an exam like this. This lecture hall looked kinda like a movie theater, with 150 seats all crammed beside each other with little wooden pads you can pull out and write on. The pads were super small as they were only like 5 inches wide and 5 inches long. On top of that, they were placed very awkwardly as well when you pulled them out. They made the rhombus shape move to your then they made a rhombus shape rather than a square shape, so either you wrote your answers out at an angle, or you moved your paper more frequently. The second of which is what I did, and as I kept my laptop on my lap. But I didn't let this poor classroom design keep me from doing well in this exam, as I managed to do very well. This exam was kind of like a review of Econ 2102, but with aspects from Math 1120 as well as Stat 1220, which is elements of statistics. Considering I tutored Math 1120 and made a 97 in Stat 1220, this made this exam very easy. So some things that were on this exam included finding optimal quantities and prices using derivatives, doing simple regressions to find demand curves that aren't pulled out of thin air, calculating sum of squared errors, and that stuff. Pretty easy, and my grade showed that, as I managed to make a 100 on this exam. So needless to say that this exam went incredibly well. But another key takeaway from this exam that I came to the realization that perhaps I should tutor Stat 1220. As mentioned, I made a 97 in this class and made a 95 on the exam. The final exam. But I found this class very frustrating and hated the material, which is why I only tutored Accounting 2121 and Math 1120. But after the exam, I decided that I should try tutoring it. So I told my boss and we agreed that after spring break, aka March 6th, I would begin tutoring it. So beginning in March, in addition to being an accounting and calculus tutor, I also became a statistics tutor. Now let's jump over to Friday, February 17th, which is the last exam I want to discuss for February 2023. This exam was for finance. Now, I had grown to find this class to not only be incredibly boring, but I also didn't really like the professor that much for two reasons. One, he was very soft-spoken and did not use a microphone, so I could barely hear him. And then two, there were not many assignments in this class. Like, there were only 4 total assignments in the whole course, outside of exams and attendance. While the assignments were helpful in reviewing the material and helping me learn the material, as I learned better by doing things, it was very difficult to find help on the assignments, as the book for the course was literally not used whatsoever and didn't relate to the assignments. I also want to bring up his lecture PowerPoints, because wow were these things like the most useless things ever. At the beginning of the semester, I was taking notes from these slides and was trying to get everything down, but our professor also made available some exam practice slides, so I went to those and they were absolutely nothing like the PowerPoints from the lectures. Instead of having definitions and simple calculations, these had far more calculations than even the assignments and were filled with stuff that I had not seen in the lectures or even the assignments. I was pretty upset and felt like there was no reason to take notes or even pay attention in class anymore, as the exam was on completely different material, so I decided to study the exam practice slides and got everything down. Then came the exam, and wow was this thing hard. All of the questions were multiple choice, but there were only 12 questions and like half the questions were on material not even covered in the exam practice slides. I don't know if our professor forgot to teach this material or copy the exam off another professor or what, because wow was this exam just bullshit. These are in my opinion the worst exams, because the ones where material not covered in class or in any review material, as there's no way of preparing for them. So I got to the end of the exam, sighed, and then submitted. And to my complete astonishment, I managed to make an 85 on this exam. Yeah, an 85, on an exam with material never covered. I was so flabbergasted that I could barely talk without breathing heavily. I wanted to react similarly to how I reacted when I beat fairy dust last August, but since I was in a room with others taking their exam, I couldn't really yell at the top of my lungs, so I went outside to calm myself down, and then celebrated with some good old Chick-fil-A. Anyways, that's all the exams I had in February. It would be another month before I would have to worry about another exam, so I was free to relax for a little while. Now, the following week, which was my last week before spring break, it seems like the administration... Now, the following week was my last week before spring break. It seems like the administration at my school has no idea when spring break is, as our spring break this year was from February 27th to March 3rd. Literally, spring break ended like 2.5 weeks before the first day of spring. Although to be fair, we did have a very warm winter, with us actually getting a new February high of 84 degrees, as well as it generally being in the 60s and 70s throughout January and February, which felt really nice after we experienced one of the coldest Decembers we've ever had. But still weird that spring break began in February and not late March or early April. Anyways, before I could begin spring break, I still had one more assignment to do, and that was for MIS. So after our exam, we would actually not cover any more new material until the spring break. Till after spring break. So a week after the exam, our professor assigned us what I will refer to as individual projects. For this, as well as the second project, we would use Microsoft Access to do some tasks our professor had listed. Very simple, but the assignments themselves were actually pretty challenging since I had never used Access. So I struggled a lot on the first assignment, probably made a few mistakes, and got very frustrated. But luckily for me, I still managed to get 100 on this project, which I felt very relieved about. By the way, for it, we basically had to control an access database regarding hotel rooms for companies or something like that. It was weird, but that's really all I remember from it. Anyways, now we can move on to spring break. Now, I unfortunately did not have a very good spring break. I went home with the intent of staying for the full week. However, things didn't work out and I had some issues occur with the family, so I ended up going back to school a few days earlier than I planned. So I had a pretty bad spring break overall. At least in 2024, I might actually be going somewhere for spring break, so I'll have to look at that. I'll have that to look forward to if I do end up going. And I'll definitely talk about a lot whenever I do my story time on my last semester at college, which will probably air in May or June of 2024, so be on the lookout for that. So, now that we're done with spring break, we can get back to talking about school, which us now being in March. So March was a weird month. The first week really sucked, but after a particular date that I'm going to discuss in a bit, the month got way better. That day in question, March 8th, 2023. Now, every March 8th since 2018 has always been special, as that of course marks the day since I tried to take my own life. Every year, I've usually celebrated my progress and kind of patted myself on the back for getting through the year without harming myself. However, this was by far the most important day of not only the semester, but also so far for 2023 for two reasons. The first reason was that this was the 5th year anniversary, officially making me half a decade self-harm free. I consider this an amazing accomplishment because it marks maturity and progress. No longer am I that 13-year-old depressed kid who thinks that he would be better off dead. Instead, I'm now an 18, almost 19-year-old man with a great life ahead of me, and I'm doing way better than I was as an 8th grader. But that's not the only big things that happened on this day. The other big thing was that I officially published my book. So for those who don't know, I began working on a book called The Charm in December of 2021. It was a challenge given me by my 9th grade English teacher, which she challenged me to write on my last day of high school. I took up her challenge and began work that night. After a little over a year of writing on December 30th, 2022, I would finish writing it. Throughout January and February of 2023, I edited and proofread the book, and then on March 8th, 2023, I got to self-publish The Charm on Amazon. I'll link the book in the description if you would like to check it out for yourself. Ironically enough, the book is actually about my experience being bullied and dealing with depression in 8th grade, which is why I decided to publish it on the 5th year anniversary of my suicide attempt. So, yeah, that was the main thing going on that day. Outside of those things, it was actually a rather normal day. I attended my classes, I ate Chick-fil-A as a way to celebrate, did some tutoring that night, and wrapped up the day by watching like Chorus Free Cool. Really good way of celebrating me being 5 years self-harm free, as well as publishing my first book, if you ask me. Now let's move on and talk about a little bit about my job. So when I returned to work from break, I talked with my boss a little bit about summer tutoring, as I wanted to tutor over the summer. She was all for it and kind of gave me the breakdown of it. In addition to asking about summer tutoring, I also asked her about additional courses to my roster, which she explained how that worked. Now, the courses I was interested in adding onto my roster were Principles of Macroeconomics, which is Econ 2101, Principles of Microeconomics, which is Econ 2102, and Managerial Economics 3125. Now, there were a few issues with me tutoring these courses though. First issue is that with me taking Managerial Economics at the time of me requesting to tutor it. However, I had a 99 in the course since I made 100 on that first exam, so that kind of gave me my credibility there. But the other issue was with my microeconomics grade. If you saw Storytime 47, you might recall that I did not do so hot in this course, only making an 83 in the class. Now, to be honest, I could have made an A in the class, but I ended up going on a cruise the second to last week of the term for my birthday. Anyways, in order for me to tutor a course, a professor from the department has to first recommend us. So I gave my boss my professor's email address since he of course was my professor for all 3 of these courses. Now, although my professor was very supportive of me tutoring Econ 2101 and 3125, he was a little bit concerned about me tutoring Econ 2102, and he had all the right to be, as an 83 is an awfully low grade in terms of being able to tutor a course, as that means we can only recall 83% of the material, so he wanted to chat with me to discuss it. I agreed, so we set up a time and then I met him at his office to discuss it. So, you'll come to know that I don't usually interact much with my professors. Why? Well, honestly, there usually is not much of a need, as I get my work done on time and of high quality, so you never see me begging professors to round my grade. Therefore, whenever I have interactions with my professors, they're usually very significant. This is an example of one of them, as well as an example of a conversation that I will probably remember for a long time. Why? Well, it just went super well. So to start, my professor and I greeted each other, talked for a little bit, and then we moved on to the main topic of the discussion. So he brought up his points regarding his issue with me tutoring Econ 2102. I then explained to him what happened, and that surprisingly changed his mind completely. Like, when I told him that I was in the Bahamas that one week, he completely understood. And just to take it up a step further, I brought up my managerial economics grade, which was a 99 as mentioned, and that immediately changed his mind. So after that, he agreed that he would be more than willing to recommend me for these 3 courses. And even if he did not recommend me for Econ 2102, he still would have recommended me for 2101 and 3125 since I did so well in those courses, so it actually would have worked out anyways. But after that, we actually talked about the economics program in general, since I'm an economics minor. I particularly asked him about intermediate microeconomics, since it is a very similar course to managerial economics. He kind of gave me an overview and even showed me an example of something they do in that course, so if I want to take it one day, I think I'd be prepared. I also asked him about econometrics, since I actually will be taking that course in July, and he showed me what they do in that course as well. The whole time, both of us were very intrigued. Like, I was super into the material and really invested in it, while he was really invested in showing me the upper level stuff. It makes sense that this would happen, as when you put an economics student and an economist in the same room, they tend to get along very well, and that's what happened here. It was also one of those situations where very few people would be able to understand what we were talking about. Like, let's say you put my mom in the room. The whole time, she would probably be looking at all the equations and graphs that me and my professor were writing down and be like, what the fuck is all this shit? Meanwhile, me and my professor knew what was going on, so we could bring these complicated stuff up and have pretty good discussions about them. And by the way, if this discussion had lasted like maybe a few hours, I bet you we would have covered his entire office in graphs and equations. And it wasn't just him drawing graphs, like I was drawing a bunch of them too as a way to visualize my thinking, while my professor verified if the ideas would work or not and then explained the reason. Once again, stuff we do in economics. After a little while, I had to leave to go to my next class, so we wrapped up our conversation, shook hands, and yeah, that was that. It was a major success, and ironically a big highlight of the semester. If this wasn't proof that my economics professor was awesome, I don't know what is. Alright, so let's move on and talk about academics for March. To start, I'm going to discuss my second exam for accounting, which took place on Thursday, March 16th. This exam was on long-term assets, so things like property, plant and equipment, and intangible assets and copyrights, like copyrights and patents. We talked about valuing these assets as well as depreciation. Now, unlike previous accounting exams, I actually felt really good about this exam, as I felt like I got most of the material down pat and was very comfortable with calculating depreciation using the straight line method, double declining balance method, and units of production. Speaking of which, the straight line method is taught in Principles Accounting 1, so I actually taught that method to my students, so you know I was comfortable with it. However, I would not do nearly as well as I expected, only making an 88 in this class, or in this exam. Yeah, I was fairly disappointed, as not including my final for Intermediate Accounting 1, this was the lowest grade I had made on an exam for an accounting exam. But nonetheless, that is still a really high B, so I was not completely butthurt over it. Moving on, let's talk about my second exam for operations management. So this exam had a little bit more math to it compared to the first exam, as we learned how to do critical path and some other stuff that I don't quite remember. In fact, this exam, like the material this exam covered, was rather forgettable. I don't really remember what happened when I took this exam, nor do I even remember my grade on this exam, but if I had to guess, I'd say I probably made it an 87. Not 100% the grade I got, but I think that's a good estimate, considering I do remember doing better than the last one. Anyways, let's move on to the next week. So on March 20th, I took my second exam for MIS. This exam was on how MIS can be applied to supply chain strategies as well as online shopping, so I was able to make some connections with operations management. But overall, this is a pretty easy exam, as I made a 92 on it, and the class overall did really well on it too, with the class average being a 90. By the way, I don't know what was going on, but the average exam scores for this course was suspiciously high. Like on the last exam when I made an 87, I wasn't even in the top 75% of scores. Yeah, I don't know what was going on. As while the exams were easy, they were not that easy, but nobody really batted an eye, so I can't really say much. But if I was the professor, I would probably be investigating that, as, I don't know, it just doesn't sound right that 3/4 of the class would make an A on the exam. Staying on the topic of MIS, we also had our second group assignment. So this time, I worked with someone I worked on the icebreaker with at the beginning of the semester. However, he would not be as easy to work with as my partner for the previous project. Rather than letting me take full control of the project and let me do most of the work, he wanted to do a little more, as we got in a few disagreements over some stuff. But they weren't full-on arguments, as we both took ideas from each other and were respectful. We just had a few times where we had disagreements. However, the biggest issue with this project were the directions. So I don't know if my professor was drunk while writing the directions or what, because these directions made no sense. Like, there were contradictions, unclear rules, and instructions, and overall, it was a mess. In fact, I couldn't even give you a description of what we had to do, because not only do I not remember it well, but the directions were so unclear that it was hard to determine what we were even supposed to do. We as a class would end up emailing her so much that she would apologize to us, rewrite the instructions, and give us all an extra 3 days to finish. The 3 days didn't really affect me or my partners though, as we finished early and made 100 on the project. So even though we could have done better with clearer instructions and more cooperations, I still think that this was a successful project and I learned a lot from working on a team on this. Anyways, I will also discuss our second individual project for MIS later, but for now, I want to go back to managerial economics and discuss the second exam for the course, which I took on March 23rd. This exam was on topics such as elasticity, marginal product, and average cost. Not the most difficult topics, but they were much more difficult than the material on the first exam. And as you can expect, I was not nearly as lucky on this exam as I was on the first exam, which I wasn't, as I only made an 87 on this exam. To be fair, I did use up the entire hour and 15 minutes for this exam, so you can kind of see why I wasn't nearly as comfortable with this material as I was with the first exam. But I would at least redeem myself for the last exam, which I'll discuss when we get to May. Anyways, let's talk about the last exam I had in March, being my second exam for finance, which I took on the 31st. Now, finance was a difficult course. However, this would be quite possibly the easy exam I've ever taken in college. Well, I take that back. The midterm for Western History back in the spring 2022 semester was also a stupidly easy exam, since we just had to write our name and get a free 100, so maybe that exam was a little easier. However, this exam actually required some effort, but not that much. This exam was on time value of money. In Intermediate Accounting 1, we learned about this concept and how to do it on a calculator. The questions as well as the material in finance in terms of time value of money was literally the exact same stuff as what we did in accounting. I had a good grip on the calculator shortcut and how to do this, since it was by far the easiest chapter in Intermediate Accounting 1. Therefore, I was able to go in and get 100 on this exam. Yeah, who would have known that one of the easy exams I would ever take would come from a pretty difficult course? Needless to say, I was really happy after getting what I could consider to be a free 100, so I celebrated by getting some Chick-fil-A and spent the rest of my day watching ReZero. But before I get to April, I want to talk about the second individual project for MIS. So compared to the first project, this one went a whole lot smoother. The reason is because I discovered that our professor uploaded a pre-recorded lecture of her showing us what we would be doing for each step. Therefore, I was able to just simply follow her and not get as frustrated. I did this on March 30th, although it was 12 AM when I began and submitted the assignment at 3 AM. But I actually was enjoying myself these 3 hours. As it was quiet, I was following along with the video, and I was at peace. I also had the lights in my room turned off, which to me felt really relaxing. And this all paid off, as I made 100 on this project. So yeah, this is probably my favorite individual project for MIS. I'll discuss one more when we get to mid-April. Now, I have one last thing I want to discuss regarding March before I get to April, and that's a pretty interesting project for operations management called the one-pager. So this project, we basically had to interview someone who works in either operations or supply chain management and ask them basically what they do, what kinds of stuff they do, and how they go about their daily routines and work. So this project allowed us to basically talk to a professional and hear what they thought. We would then write down their answers and then translate this into a one-page paper about what we wanted to get out of the interview and what we managed to get out of the interview. Now, normally, I would be terrified of these projects because I'm super nervous whenever I have to reach out to strangers. Although you might think tutoring has helped me with this, the thing is that with tutoring, it's the stranger reaching out to me by setting up an appointment, and then that stranger becomes a client who sometimes becomes a friend. But in this case, I actually have to reach out to someone. But luckily for me, I know a supply chain management professional, my own dad. As I said before, Dad works as a purchasing manager, so he's of course in charge of purchasing materials and getting them shipped to his company at the lowest cost possible. It sounds really easy, but it's surprisingly very complex, and it only becomes more complex when I did my interview with him. Overall, the interview went really well. He told me about some of the things that he does at work, the processes he works with such as materials requirements planning or MRP, run it rates, and other operational measures. It was a pretty easy interview overall, as Dad also made the interview very cooperative with me by using some economics concepts since I'm a lot more knowledgeable in economics than I am in supply chain management, which helped a ton when jotting down his answers and allowing me to formulate more questions for him. Anyways, after I did that interview, I was able to begin work on writing the one-pager. Of course, as someone who's written and published an almost 800-word or 800-page book, this was the easiest part of the assignment, as I also had access to all the answers since I wrote them down, so I was able to include what Dad talked about onto the one-pager. I finished it in like 30 minutes and then submitted it, and the best part was I made 100 on it. So yeah, this project went really well. And now we can move on to April. So April 2023 was overall a pretty good month for me. This would be the month where I finished 3 of my courses for the semester, discovered Power Metal, and even became a more popular tutor than I already was. Like, I'm not kidding when I say that many of my tutees would have to schedule appointments 2 weeks in advance during this time because I was literally so popular with tutoring. Now, unlike most jobs, my hours are not set by my boss. They depend on when people schedule tutoring. But of course, since I was gaining so many students, I was constantly working 20 hours a week, which felt really nice. Anyways, April would also be a big month for me regarding my job because back in March, I applied to host a Reading Day review session. So the tutoring department offers review sessions on Reading Day for a few select courses to allow students to prepare for their finals. It's a helpful way for students to get some last-minute review before they take their finals. Now, these sessions were hosted by us tutors. Basically, if we tutored a course, we were qualified to host these. To basically let our boss know that we were interested, we filled out a Google form stating what course we wanted to host, the review session, and that stuff. I chose to apply to host the session for Accounting 2121, as I felt that it would help me prepare for my upcoming Intermediate Accounting 2 exam, or final, since that's actually quite a bit of material from 2121 that carries over to this course. On top of that, as an upper-level accounting student, I felt that I was also pretty qualified to host this session, since I had a lot of knowledge about accounting. However, I was competing against a few other accounting tutors for this opportunity, most of whom had more experience tutoring than I did, with some even having been at the department before I even graduated high school. I was also kind of at a disadvantage because of my age, as I of course was the youngest tutor and I still am the youngest tutor at the department. But fortunately, my boss chose not to consider my disadvantages and look more at my strengths, as throughout the semester, I proved that I was very valuable and was super effective at my job, with my reviews being very high and me also being recommended by everyone left and right. So ultimately, she chose to give this opportunity to me, which I was super happy about. Now, of course, hosting a review session for over 50 students would not be something I could just wait until then, as I needed to prepare. So throughout April, I would take a break from working on my formula sheet for statistics and focus on creating a review packet for the session. It took a lot of work, but I ultimately finished it, and then I spent the rest of my time until the big day reviewing the problems on the packet. The review session wouldn't be until May 3rd, so I'll discuss it when I get to May. But staying on the topic of the review session, I also want to mention something pretty cool that kind of reinforced the idea that I was very popular. So a fellow accounting tutor was working on some review sheets for his students for Accounting 2121. However, he wanted someone to look over them to make sure they were accurate, so he asked our boss for help. Our boss referred him to me, since I made a whole bunch of review sheets for Accounting 2121 at the beginning of the semester, and since I was hosting the review session for the course. I then reached out to the tutor, and starting every Thursday for the next couple weeks, we would meet during my drop-in hours so I can review his sheets and give him some tips on writing better and more clear problems. He would also return the favor by reviewing my packet for a Reading Day review session. I would also learn that he was hosting the Reading Day review session for Accounting 2122, which is Principles of Accounting 2. So we were both able to kind of help each other out prepare for a Reading Day and that stuff. So yeah, that's how work went this month. Again, I'll discuss Reading Day when we get to May, but for now, let's talk about academics, as while I didn't take nearly as many exams this month, I did wrap up 3 of my 6 courses this month. To start, let's talk about the third exam for Operations Management, which I took on April 14th. This was by far the hardest exam for the course, as this was on the most difficult material from the course, Inventory and MRP. Both of these subjects were incredibly difficult, especially MRP, as there's so many steps and processes you have to do that makes this topic incredibly challenging. And this exam was just as hard as I expected. A lot of weird calculations and 5 MRP problems. I ultimately thought I was going to make a 40 on this exam, as it was literally that difficult. However, luck would be on my side, as I would actually make way higher than a 40. By that, I mean I made a 74. Now, normally, I get upset when I make a C, but on this occasion, I was really happy about making a C because while an A was no longer possible in the course, if I made at least a 30 on the last exam, then I could keep a B in the class. Therefore, I could relax some for the last exam, which is what I'm now going to discuss because I also took this exam in April, specifically April 28th. Originally, this exam was meant for May 1st, but our professor decided to let us take it beginning that Friday and over the weekend because he felt that it would be unfair to assign it right before exam week began. So I chose to take it on the 28th. This exam was far easier than the previous one, as it was on Six Sigma and quality control. Both of these topics were very statistics heavy, and of course being a statistics tutor, this worked super well for me. So well that I made a 96 on this exam, since most of what this exam was on could be done using a calculator shortcut or a simple calculation. And with that, I officially wrapped up Operations Management, giving me an 87 in the class. Although the class was a little harder than I expected, I was still pretty pleased with my grade. Now let's move on and talk about my third exam for Intermediate Accounting 2. So this exam, which I took on April 18th, was on some super difficult material. This difficult material in question involved accounting for investment and debt securities, i.e. stocks and bonds, conditions that might make a bonds payable a current liability, quality assurance warranties, and accounting for litigation settlements and when to record losses regarding legal conflicts. These were all super difficult topics. Not nearly as difficult as construction problems from Intermediate Accounting 1, but they were all very difficult. Therefore, I went in predicting that I would do horribly and came out of the exam thinking I did terribly. But luckily, I did much better than I expected, as I made an 80 on this exam. Although this was the lowest grade I had ever made on an intermediate accounting exam, I was still very happy about it, as I did way better than I expected and one I considered a very difficult exam. Moving on from accounting, let's talk about MIS, or actually wrap up MIS, as it kind of had the same thing as operations management, just that I was expecting to finish this course before May. Anyways, we took our third and final exam on April 24th. This would be by far the easiest exam in the course, as most of the material covered was stuff that I knew prior to taking the course. Things like computer viruses, cybersecurity, hacking, that stuff. Even though I am not a hacker and do not know much about hacking, I'm still pretty good with online safety and determining whether or not a website is safe or unsafe. Therefore, I was able to go in here and without even looking at my notes, I was able to make a 97 in this exam. Yeah, it was that easy. Seems like the rest of the class agreed, as the class average was a 98 and the lowest score was an 85. So yeah, nice to have an easy exam was the last one. And then that left only one more thing for MIS, the last individual project. Our professor chose not to do another group project, so I didn't have to worry about one. Anyways, this project was a little different, as instead of being on Access, it was on Excel. So for me, this was much easier to navigate since I'm more familiar with Excel than Access. However, I wouldn't really try that much on this project since I had the previous two. Reason being is I only needed a 43 on this project to keep an A in the class, so I decided to half-ass it and not do that well. As a result, I only made a 75 on this project, but that's okay because it still meant that I made a 94 in MIS. I did this project on April 26th, so that was the day I officially wrapped up MIS. And now, let's discuss the third course I wrapped up this month, being Professional Development for Accountants. As I said at the beginning of the story time, though a lot happened in this course, I don't want to disclose much because of it relates to my prospective professional life and career. I have a lot of plans for the future and I would prefer to keep them to myself, so that's why I chose not to discuss this class very much. Anyways, let's discuss the last assignment I had for this course, being the summative paper. For it, we basically had to write a 1 to 2 page paper about how we learned in what we learned in this course, what our biggest takeaways were, and how we plan to use what we learned into our professional lives. I have to give it to my professor for making this assignment, as I think this is the perfect way to wrap up this course. Like, for me, if I ever became a professor, this is what my finals would be like, as I think letting students express themselves and basically reflect on what they learn is more interesting and thought-provoking than a simple 50-question exam. And this is coming from an accounting student. Anyways, I had a lot of fun writing this paper and had a very easy time writing it too, since it was basically like writing a story time but about one specific course rather than an entire semester. I got to write about why I chose accounting, what I learned in the course, my prospective professional career, and a few other stuff. My professor also found the paper very fun to read, giving me 100 and commenting that he enjoyed reading it. I wrote this paper on April 23rd, so with that, I was officially done with all my assignments for this course. However, I wasn't completely done with this course yet, as there was still one more class that I needed to attend since attendance counted towards my grade, which I attended on April 25th. It was really just a wrap-up class where our professor basically reviewed what we learned and said goodbye. Once I left the classroom, I was officially done with this course. So yeah, by the end of April, I was down to just 3 courses. That felt really nice and made me a lot more relaxed, especially by the fact that it would only drop to 2 once finals began. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch on in regards to April, which is about Mom. So, during this time, Mom was also a student at my college, where she was pursuing a master's degree in elementary education. This was her last semester, and for any of my viewers who hold or are working towards a master's degree, you know what kind of treachery the last semester holds. That's right, I'm talking about the thesis. Mom's thesis involved testing how well her students do on tests when she provides a form of instruction compared to another type. Now, while she was able to get all the qualitative research stuff, she needed help with her quantitative research. quantitative research deals with numbers, statistics, and mathematically proving things. And of course, knowing her son tutors statistics, why not call him up and get his help? So that's what we did. I agreed to help Mom, and in return, she paid me in Five Guys. However, I wouldn't really be very helpful here, as it seemed like a lot of the calculations required of Mom that I did not learn or tutor in Stat 1220. Additionally, I couldn't really create an accurate regression model because she had a t-test rather than a z-test. But that isn't to say that I wasn't completely useless, as I was still able to help her with things like finding the standard deviation of each stat, as well as calculating some probabilities, so it still came in helpful, which Mom very much appreciated. Now, we were also talking about my job as well, as things were going really well since I was very popular. This would pretty much be the moment that Mom determined that, yeah, me leaving the bookstore and becoming a tutor was ultimately the right decision, as I was happier, getting more hours, making much more money, and the best part, I was able to transfer my skills to help her. So yeah, it went very well. Anyways, that's all that happened during the month of April. Let's move on to the last month of the semester, being May. So far, May has been the best month. Well, now it's June. Originally, I was going to make this story time in May, but yeah, so far this year, May has been the best month of 2023. Of course, you had me wrapping up the semester, but there's also quite a bit that happened, with the main highlight being me taking my grandmother up to Delaware the week after the semester ended. However, I will not discuss this trip in the story time since it took place after the semester ended, but I may discuss it in a future one because a lot happened and it was extremely enjoyable for both me and my grandmother. Anyways, going back to college, let's start by wrapping up managerial economics with my last exam for this course, which I took on May 2nd, the last day of classes for the semester, which this exam was on perfectly competitive markets, imperfect markets, monopolies, kink demand curves, and game theory. We discussed a lot of this material back in Principles of Microeconomics, which I found very difficult because not only did we go over this material while I was on my cruise, but the material itself was never really made sense to me. But in this course, I'm not sure what happened to the my music just paused out of nowhere. But in this course, this stuff for some reason made complete sense, and I was able to get everything down pat. It's funny, because while adding math into a subject makes things more complicated for most people, it actually simplifies topics for me just because I'm so math-oriented. But that's what happened, and as a result, I was able to go in and do very well in this exam. However, there was one question in particular that really messed with me. So one of the best ways I could check to see if I was doing something right on the exam was if I was getting whole numbers. My professor said himself that he won't give us partial numbers for quantities, as having half a unit doesn't make any sense. Therefore, all quantity values must be whole numbers. So if I got a decimal, then that means I either made a stupid mistake or took the derivative of the wrong equation. So that's what happened on one question. However, after doing it 5 times, I finally managed to get a whole number. While I was still unsure about my answer, as I did at least feel better about it. So I decided that would be my final answer. So I wrapped up the rest of the exam, handed it to my professor, and left managerial economics for the last time. And the best part is that night, I learned that I got that question right, although our professor didn't provide us with marks on the exam to see what we got wrong. I know this because and how do I know that I got this question right? Well, look at that. I made 100 on the exam. Yeah. I made 100 on not one, but 2 of the 3 exams for managerial economics, which is supposedly, quote-unquote, as hard as it gets, according to my professor. My final grade ended up being a 96, which was certainly well-deserved and fitting as my new favorite class that I've taken in college. However, I did not have time to rest, as I had something even bigger than wrapping up managerial economics coming up, and that was reading day review session, a day that I had been spending the last 3 weeks preparing for. All my hard work throughout April was come down to this day, so there was quite a bit of pressure on me to do well. Anyways, I woke up a few minutes before noon, took a shower, and then put some dress clothes on. Even though this wasn't a formal event, I tend to have a better mindset and feel more determined whenever I am dressed professionally, so that's why I chose to wear business attire for this event. The only problem though was getting to where the session was, as it was a 15-minute walk from my dorm. While this usually is not a big deal, as I've gotten used to walking long distances as a college student, this is a little rough to do in business clothes in 80-degree weather, but around 12:45, I made it and got settled. After a little messing around with technology, I got settled and it was time to wait on everyone. The first people to arrive were actually the graduate student workers. Basically, the tutoring department has graduate students who work as coordinators and assist us tutors out, as well as perform supervisional duties. Each reading day review session had 2 graduate workers who kinda oversaw the session, so if there were any issues, I wouldn't have to do anything, as they would instead take charge. Anyways, for the first 15 minutes, they basically just talked with me, reminded me of how the session would work, and also provided a little bit of emotional support, as at this point, I was trembling. Like, I was stupidly terrified. So their encouragement was definitely needed and actually helped me with my nerves quite a bit. And then at around 1, we got our first few students come in. Pretty soon, more and more students arrived. Then at 1:30, it was time to begin the session. One of the graduate students came over, gave me some last minute encouragement, and then we hit the session off. So to start, the graduate student basically welcomed everyone to the session, as well as gave an outline to everyone on how the session would work. She also talked about the rules and other things to consider. Then she introduced me, told everyone my credentials, and basically did all the introductions for me, which relieved a bit of stress for me, as I didn't have to bother with introductions. And then she handed me the floor. I first introduced the students to a Padlet website where they could type questions as well as request to work on a particular topics. After that, I officially began the session. So for it, I used a PowerPoint presentation to go over the questions. I would then interchange between it and the projector so I could show the students how to get the correct answer. Anyways, the first hour went very well. I went through each problem, did the math for the math-based problems, and then I verbally explained the conceptual problems. Overall, it went very well. I also had some pretty good engagement, as some students, although they didn't have to, did ask me questions verbally, and I actually did very well explaining them. So while this was much more different than tutoring, I was still able to translate what I learned from tutoring to this. In fact, you could even kind of consider this review session like the final exam for tutoring, since I get to apply what I learned from tutoring into a mega review session. So that's another way to think of this session. Anyways, an hour later, it was time to take a 10-minute break. So I wrapped up the question I was working on and then got chilled, and then just chilled. The graduate assistants came and gave me more encouragement, and after a little while, then the break was up, and it was time to continue the session. That was the worst. I think that's the worst paragraph I've ever written in Storytime. Now, usually these sessions lose roughly half of their attendees during their break. However, amongst the 53 students who attended, I think I only lost around 5 people during this break. This gave me a ton of energy and a lot of support, as this let me know that I was doing so well that I was keeping 90% of my attendees for the full 2 hours. According to the graduate assistants, to have even 75% of the attendees stay was already rare enough, so keeping 90% was just downright incredible and proof that I was super effective. Now, during the break, multiple students on the Padlet mentioned that their finals was only going to consist of the last few chapters of the course. So when we congregated back, I asked everyone if they were okay with me skipping ahead and going over those problems. Everyone said they were fine with that, so that's what I did for the second half of the session. Now, of course, as mentioned, seeing so many people stay really boosted my energy, and as a result, I was able to have what I consider to be probably my greatest hour of work ever. And I don't mean just from tutoring, I mean from every other job I've had, which includes my college's bookstore and a local grocery store. You can kind of think of what was going through my mind like an anime character in a fight, where they might recall a memory from their childhood and then use it in the fight. That's what happened here, but instead of finding a villain, I was teaching accounting. But throughout this hour, I would provide probably the best examples I had ever shared with students in a session, as well as achieve a level of effectiveness that I have never achieved in regards to teaching. Like, I was answering every questions on the PowerPoint as if I was a partner at a Big Four, as well as teaching so effectively that everyone was easy to pick up on what I was saying. And then, the clock struck 3:30, which was ironically the time I finished the last question. Then it was the end of the review session. The graduate assistant then came up and wrapped up the session, encouraged everyone to fill out the evaluation form, and then the attendees gave me a round of applause. After that, everyone was dismissed. A lot of people came up and thanked me for hosting the session and encouraging me some more, and once everyone left, I was officially done with reading day review session that I had been preparing 3 weeks for. This felt incredibly nice and relieving to have over. Of course, after doing something like this, I needed to celebrate, so I went over to Chick-fil-A and treated myself to a chicken sandwich and some fries, and then for the rest of the day, I pretty much spent laying in my bed relaxing. Later that day, I would get an email from my boss congratulating me on my successful day, as well as sending me over the feedback the attendees provided on the evaluation. The feedback was great, was really positive. Some comments made on here included, great tutor, even though I came last minute, I felt like I relearned the entire exam, Zach used great real-world examples, and he was a great teacher. These comments really boosted my mood, as I'm not really used to receiving a lot of encouragement, as I don't really spend much time around people. In fact, with the exception of being discharged from the mental hospital as well as my last day of high school, I haven't had a day where I've received this much praise and encouragement, so this definitely put me in a really good mood for the rest of the day, even if I was completely out of energy. Now let's move on to the next day, being Thursday, May 4th. So on this day, my sister had a cheerleading competition in Disney World, so she, mom, and dad would be down in Orlando until Monday. I chose to stay at home so I could take care of the cat and study for finals, as I still had finals for accounting and finance. I also wanted to go ahead and bring some stuff home to make moving out not nearly as hard. So that's what happened. I went home that Thursday and spent the whole weekend with the cat while watching My Hero Academia and studying for my exams. It was a really awesome weekend since I didn't have to leave the house at all and was by myself the whole time. Anyways, I'll go back to school on Monday as I had my accounting final the next day and in my last exam for finance that Wednesday. So let's talk about my accounting final, which I took on May 9th. Now, for those who have seen Storytime 47, you are easily able to catch up on this, as this final worked pretty much the same way as my final for Intermediate Accounting 1. So, just like the other exams for this course, there were two sections of the exam, the multiple choice and the problems, or short answer questions. And just like the final for Intermediate Accounting 1, the multiple choice section was cumulative, meaning it covered all material discussed in this course, so things like inventory and freight costs all the way to investments, current liabilities, and bonds payable. However, the short answer section was exclusively the last chapter in the course, as we had never been tested on it. The last chapter was interestingly the easiest chapter in the course, which I found really surprising because it was all about bonds payable and recognizing interest over time, which I struggled a lot with back in Intermediate Accounting 1. But considering I spent a lot of time on this chapter throughout my time studying, I pretty much got the hang of it, and now I no longer find bonds that difficult anymore. So while the short answer problems are usually the hardest problems on the exam, on this one, they were actually the easiest. In fact, I actually found this exam much easier than the final for Intermediate Accounting 1, as I felt better with the material and also didn't have a mental breakdown the night before like I did for the final for Intermediate 1. However, I actually would not do as well in this final, as I only made an 80 on it, but I was still very happy with my grade, as although I could have not taken the final and still passed the course, I only needed a 44 to make a B in the class, so I was satisfied. If I had made a 90, I could have made an A in the class, but I really did not want to stress myself out over that much, so I was fine with taking an 88 and finishing the second and of the 3 intermediate accounting courses I have to take. So now let's move on to the next day, being May 10th, the day that I took my last exam for the semester. This exam, of course, is for finance. Now, unfortunately, this exam was much more similar to our first exam than our second, as although it was non-cumulative and only the most recent material was covered, we've quote-unquote covered, a lot of the material in the exam was not only taught in class or in the book, but there were no resources to prepare for this course, for this exam. In fact, with all the resources available, the highest grade you could really make without guessing was a 75. Yeah, a quarter of the material on the exam was not covered in class, in the textbook, lecture notes, or anywhere else in the course. Yeah, that's just downright unfair to give an exam like this, since it is everyone's first finance class and we should therefore not be expected to know the material prior to taking the course. So, as you can tell, this exam was super frustrating to take, as I had to skip a lot of questions because they were bullshit. But after taking the exam, I submitted it, and what do you know, I made a 64 on it. I had mixed thoughts about this grade. I was very disappointed because I was actually just 8 points behind a 72, which is what I needed to make an A in the class. As a result, I was having to take a B in a class that I've had a 97 in the entire semester, and I wasn't even provided many opportunities to increase my already high grade because I was graded by only 4 assignments and 3 exams, so you could tell that I was really frustrated here. But at the same time, I was actually really happy about this grade, as I did much better than I expected, since I was expecting around a 40. On top of that, I was just relieved to be done with this course, because maybe with the exception of Western history, this was probably the worst class I've ever taken in college. The material covered in class, the material on our assignments, and the material on our exams were mostly unrelated to each other. My professor could not speak up and could barely be heard. Our grades consisted of only a couple assignments and exams, and this was just a downright god-awful class I'm glad I will never take again. Which, I know I might be acting harsh here since our professor wasn't given any time to prepare and was just a PhD student, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, as this is really the finance department as a whole's fault, since they should have had a professor assigned prior at the beginning of the course. This is also why I decided to drop finance as my double major, as there's no way I could put up with shit like this, as I've looked at the classes I would be taking if I did stick to finance, and those classes are apparently even worse than this one. Finance bros who are watching this can go on about why they love finance and why it's better than accounting, but I just can't see it at all. Accounting is way better than finance in every way possible, so I'm sticking to accounting. But overall, my happiness for this grade outweighed my disappointment. So ultimately, I felt good about my grade, even if I had to take an 88 in this class. Therefore, I decided that for the rest of the day, I was going to take it easy and watch some good old My Hero Academia. So that's what I did. I had not watched any since I returned to campus that Monday, as I was busy with exams and all that. While at home, I watched the entirety of Season 2 and got very far in Season 3. I believe I stopped 2 episodes before the fight between All Might and All for One, which is considered the best fight in the show and one of the best fights in all of anime. Although, I'm more of a fan of Deku versus Chizaki. That was a badass fight, but All Might versus One for All, or All for One, was a really good fight. So, now that I was finished with exams, I could relax and continue the show, and I'll just say, this fight did not disappoint at all. It is just incredible. It just, seeing like the development overall, the fight was just epic. It was amazing. I'll link the fight, and I'll leave the episode in the description, since it's just such a cool fight. But nonetheless, after my hard work throughout the semester, I fully deserve to see this kick-ass fight. Now, before I get to my full reflection of this semester, let's first talk about moving out of my dorm. So this was actually kind of emotional, as I had been living here since August of 2022, so it was sad to move out. I made a lot of great memories in this dorm, from having it all to myself the fall 2022 semester, to watching a whole bunch of anime, to just having a way better living arrangements than the spring 2022 semester. I had a lot of fun here. The living arrangements for next year will be a little different, and I'll explain them when we get there. Anyways, move out day for me was Friday, May 12th. The night before, I packed everything up and prepared to get everything moved out. Then the next morning at 7:45, Dad made his way up to help me get my stuff out. Now, we were expecting to do some painting and a lot of tough work, but we ended up finding out that we didn't have to actually do all that, and therefore, we ended up finishing the move-out process very quickly. So we decided we'd get breakfast as well as shop for a little bit. We had to stay in the area though, as Mom had her graduation that day, so that's what we did. Then after a while, we saw Mom's graduation, and afterwards, we made our way home, officially ending Mom's journey for her master's in elementary education and my third semester of college. And there we have it. The spring 2023 semester is officially over, meaning I am now more than halfway done with college. Thankfully, it seems like that the more I progress, the easier the semesters get, as this was by far the easiest semester I've had at college. The spring 2022 semester was incredibly difficult, and the fall 2022 semester was not nearly as difficult, but still pretty challenging. Meanwhile, this semester was pretty easy. Therefore, if this pattern continues for my upcoming semesters, that means the fall 2023 and spring 2024 semesters will be much easier and less stressful. Although I think the spring 2024 semester will still be pretty difficult, since it'll be the semester I'll be determining living arrangements and jobs and all that stuff. But overall, college is going well, and I'm pretty excited to be over halfway finished now. So now, as for the spring 2023 semester itself, it was overall a very successful one. I came out with 3 A's and 3 B's. Sure, I could have done better, but in comparison to others my age, I'm doing way better than most, as most students are struggling to even make a passing grade. On top of that, most students my age spent their semester partying and doing things they shouldn't be doing, while I focused on bettering myself, improving my mental and emotional health, and overall learned more about myself than I've even begun the process of accepting myself for who I am. So, sure, while I had my lowest semester GPA, coming out with only a 3.44 semester GPA, this was probably my best semester developmentally and mentally. Besides, my cumulative GPA now sits at a 3.62, and that's still really good considering some can't even keep a 2.0. And to make things better, I not only made this semester better for myself, but I got to improve it for others through tutoring. Speaking of tutoring, on the last day of the semester, my boss emailed me again, this time providing me with the evaluation results for my students and their feedback. And their feedback was actually even more positive than what I received at the reading day review session. Some of the comments they made included, best tutor I've had, he is kind and respectful, and one that really hit home, Zach was absolutely amazing. He explained everything very well and was extremely understanding. I would recommend him to so many others and will continue using his help. Needless to say that I have a very successful semester with tutoring as well, and I plan to continue tutoring until I graduate, as I not only get good hours and make good money, but I get to help my peers, and I can say my mental health has improved as a result of tutoring. Anyways, I wouldn't officially get settled until the following weekend, as that week, I of course took my grandmother to Delaware to see family, as well as visit some places, such as taking a ferry over to New Jersey and visiting Philadelphia. We both had a great trip, and it was overall a blast. Therefore, it would be roughly a week later when I returned home and officially got settled. Now let's talk about summer courses. So I am taking 4 summer courses this summer. For the first summer session, which I'm actually halfway done with now, I'm taking 2 courses, and then during the second summer session, I'll be taking 2 more. So at the moment, I am taking Management 3140, which is Management and Organizational Behavior. It's basically about what a manager does and how to be an effective leader. It meets online every Thursday. I am also taking Communications 3160, which is Business Communications. This is an asynchronous course about communication skills needed in the workplace. These aren't too difficult courses, as not only do they not really require that much work, but I also don't even have any exams. So I've been very relaxed this summer, and I've been more relaxed this summer than I have in a long time. Now, in July, my classes are going to pick up in difficulty. So one course I'll be taking then will be Economics 3112, which is Econometrics. This will probably be the most challenging course to take this summer. However, considering it is an upper-level economics course, and after seeing how much easier managerial economics was compared to principles of microeconomics, I don't think it will be nearly that bad. The second course I will be taking will be Marketing 3140, which is Principles of Marketing. This is widely considered the easiest business core course that business majors are required to take, so it won't be that bad either. Additionally, I am also tutoring this summer, just that I am doing all my tutoring online. I'm still tutoring accounting, calculus, statistics, but now I also offer tutoring for principles of macroeconomics, principles of microeconomics, and managerial economics. So I'm now tutoring more courses and I'm still getting good hours. So yeah, I've pretty much got the optimal schedule this summer. Now let's talk about this fall. So the fall 2023 will start a few days early, as I will need to attend the semester training for my job like what I did at the beginning of the spring. Therefore, I will be moving in 3 days before everyone else, as my boss submitted a waiver to housing to let me move in early and get settled, so I can attend the training. Speaking of moving in, let's discuss my living arrangements for the fall 2023 and spring 2024 semesters. So how things work is that I will be in a dorm for upperclassmen. I'll be in a 4-person, 4-bedroom apartment-style room, where we each have our own bedrooms, but we share a living room, kitchen, a laundromat, and 2 bathrooms. I haven't talked to my future roommates yet, although I'll probably reach out to them in July to get to know them and so we can agree on what we should bring and all that stuff. I also want to talk about my courses I'll be taking. So this fall, I will be taking courses entirely within my major and minor, so no business core or any extra courses. I will be taking Accounting 2122, which is Principles Accounting 2, Accounting 325, which is Intermediate Accounting 3, Accounting 3340, which is Accounting Information Systems, Accounting 4220, which is Income Tax, and Economics 3151, which is Law and Economics. So I'll be taking a typical 15-credit course load this coming semester. So yeah, that's all I got for this story time. Thank you all so much for watching this story time, and I'll catch you all on Storytime 52 whenever I decide to upload one.